Hello there, and welcome to part 2 of my explanation of the development of mass media from the 1960s to the present day 2010s. Alright, we've covered newspapers and its steady decline through the 60s and 70s. We've talked about television and its great evolution into how we perceive television today and its boom in popularity. We have discussed advertising and how it is, had to be regulated to remove things that the people of the 70s found harmful to children and adults. And we're seeing how the glorious internet is making its way to the internet that we know it to be today. So, let's go and get started with my awesome graph. Yes. Alright, so, the 1980s. Awesome times. I mean, Michael Jackson, all that good stuff. 1980s. Newspapers. They were in very, very serious decline. Partially because, if you'll look, I have CNN pointed to down there with my television bracket, so we'll get on to that. It was in very serious decline. Now, this created quite the oligarchy. It was basically the downgrade that was going on back in the 60s happened again in a large scale in the 1980s. Newspapers were being bought up by all these big companies, and they eventually ended up and the field of newspapers was narrowed all the more. Now, if you look, the USA Today came along in the 1980s, and it was actually fairly popular back then. People enjoyed hearing about news all around the country. Exclusively, it was just designated all around the country, as opposed to a paper like the New York Times, or for us in Spartanburg, the Herald Journal, being very narrow-minded and focused on local news. Now, this was a big time for television back in the 1980s. Woo! They experienced a huge growth. Cable, pay-per-view, central cable news network, CNN, MTV, music television, shopping. Now, this is huge. This was basically like the internet of the 1980s right here. People, imagine what, just imagine what people said. Oh my gosh, I can shop from the comfort of my home. I can just sit in my recliner and shop all day. Now, what does that sound like to you? That sounds to me like something that people say about the internet. Does it not? Now, also during the 1980s, if you'll look right here, satellites. Oh yes, satellite television came into play. Let's see. The power of advertising was definitely revealed back in the 1980s. A big thing was sports stars being paid millions and millions of dollars so that companies could just put their name on a product, such as Air Jordans. And despite all this advertising raising prices of shoes up past $100, people bought them like crazy. The power of the brand name became very prominent in the 1980s. Now, in the 1980s, the government found that schools were really connecting one another via networks, so they got their own networks so that their classified information wasn't just thrown around all over the place. And NASA developed the NSI network. And this network went worldwide. This right here was totally groundbreaking for the internet that we see it to be today. Because, what do we call the internet? The World Wide Web. And this was the very first worldwide internet network. So this was, as you can imagine, very groundbreaking for the time. Now, on over to the 1990s. Newspapers saw that, if you look down here, the internet went public. See right there? Internet goes public. So newspapers such as the New York Times saw the great amount of advertising going on the internet, and we'll get back to that shortly. They saw the great amount of advertising going on, so they were like, hey, if we can get people to access our online edition, we'll make a ton of money by just advertising. And it was very popular. They made a pretty good amount of money at it. And that's why a lot of newspapers. That's why so many newspapers were very quick to adopt this ideology. Now, television. We found that they were becoming questionable shows were becoming very prominent, such as MTV's Beavis and Butthead and stuff like that, The Simpsons. So a rating system was put into place. The very rating system that we know about today. This was a huge step into the television that we know it to be today. And also international broadcasts were really put into play during this time. Now, during the 1990s, ads made a drastic move to the internet. They saw the advantages of advertising to the entire world. So they were placed on the internet. Ads were also very deceitful at this time. They were disguising themselves as other articles. So this was definitely before any kind of legislation that prevented them from doing that. As I said, in the 1990s, the internet went public. The advertising agencies popped up on this instantly, which is one of the reasons that we have internet newspapers, because they saw the power of advertisement on the internet. And also the purchasing of ad blockers was made available, and they were bought, but now they're free. How awesome is that? But still, companies such as Norton and whatnot, they've changed themselves from exclusively ad blockers to security programs. So, good for them. Making advantage of free enterprise. Awesome. Now, we're at the 2000s now, y'all. 2000s. Ooh. There was a further oligopoly, once again, towards the in the area of newspapers because of the internet. Newspapers that couldn't make the change over to they couldn't make the exchange over towards an internet edition. They just failed, and they had to sell themselves to even larger newspapers. So let me just go ahead and give you some stats on this. 1960s, there were 256 cities with competing newspapers, at least two or more. And here we come up to the 2000s, and there was less than 50. So really big hits going on all around the nation. Now, here in the 2000s, we have internet-capable televisions. And not just that, we have online television. So this was a very big jump in the 2000s, but ironically, this would lead to the partial demise of cable and satellite television. But more about that later. Now, very big. In the 2000s, companies such as Google were selling info to companies and space for advertising at the same time. So let's go ahead and talk about this real quick. I just want to go ahead and throw something at you. This is very, very interesting, and basically Google has set the groundwork for every single other advertising company out there. Google originally started out as a search engine, and they would sell that information to other companies, and they will also say, "Hey, you know what? You know what they like. We can tell you what they like, so you can be much more selective in who you advertise to." Now, this was very, very. This is groundbreaking stuff. In all honesty, Google is huge. Now, I mean, they're one of the most expensively traded companies on the planet. Now, here's what else they're doing. Now, they have their own internet browser now, and this browser is highly effective at blocking out ads. That is, unless Google allows the ads. So effectively, they're knocking out their competition by making it to where, and this ad browser is very popular as well, which is why it's so effective. Now, I've got to cut off now, but I will have a part 3 put up. So yeah, catch you in a bit.